And the last thing I want to do is blow out the windows of the studio and have you guys come, Mr. Crandall coming after me.
How did you become involved in special effects?
In the early 70s, I just finished high school, wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was working as an auto mechanic for Theta Cable Television, the first cable company in the US. And that's in Santa Monica, which is where I grew up. And then I'd been there for a couple of years, and I was hoping to go to UCLA for either engineering or architecture. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, like most kids. And then my father, who was working at MGM at the time, said they're hiring. And I was going to go in just as a laborer and try and save some money for college. And instead, I met a man named Glenn Robinson, who has like 20 Technical Achievement Awards, 4 Academy Awards, and he's the head of the special effects department. At the time, they were doing Logan's Run. And he said, well, we can hire prop makers, and I started there, then and there that day. So my grandfather was kind of a legend in special effects. He's a pyrotechnic guy. He was the powder foreman at MGM for around 30 years. He worked all over a lot of different studios. He got to California from Michigan in the 20s, and he was a blaster on the railroads. So he had some experience in pyrotechnics, dynamite, that type of thing. But so he was kind of a chemist. So he developed a lot of, along with other people at the same time, people like Tony Paglia, and there's some famous pyrotechnic guys that are squibs, are bullet hits that we use today. So in those days, it was blasting caps. Well, you don't want to put a blasting cap on a human. So how to develop a reasonably reliable yet soft pyrotechnic that can simulate bullet hits on walls, bullet hits on people, that type of thing. So he helped with that, and he ran that portion of MGM for many years. And in 1961 or 2, I'm not sure, he had retired in 60. He came back to help them on some of the Alamo. Daniel Boone was a big TV show. They were having trouble with this flintlock rifles, the blanks not firing. So he came back to help them on that, and they had been experimenting with some things, and the day he came back to help them, he walked into the nitrate film vault where they were storing the material, and it exploded, and it killed 3 people. Him and a guy named Larry Price and a man named Carl Friend. And they're not certain exactly what happened. They suspect vapor and static electricity, or vapor and compression. These things are all part of how you fire a detonator. And anyway, killed him. So that was tough for my father. I was 6. So my father kept working on films like In Harm's Way, a lot of things at Paramount. He was there for quite a while. And then he ended up back at MGM, and that's when I got the chance. That was in 1975. So we did Logan's Run, King Kong, things like The Formula, and then we started doing a TV show for Logan's Run. And then an opportunity came up. A guy I was working with closely named Fred Kramer, he got a film called The Deer Hunter. And I was supposed to go just be the low man on the totem pole, the young guy that can run. And it ended up being I was the second guy. And so I did most of the US, did half of it with Fred, and then about a third of it with by myself. And then we went to Thailand, and I turned 22 in Thailand on The Deer Hunter on the River Kwai. And so things like the village exploding and the blood when Chris Walken kills himself and all of that. There's a couple of things that I built. And then I worked with Fred for about 6 years, kind of learned my craft, and then started doing small things on my own.
Between your start in the 1970s to now, what have been some of the biggest changes to special effects?
Yeah, the 70s and 80s were pretty basic physical effects. The rigging started getting bigger, the pictures started getting bigger. The size of crews were much bigger back then. I'm sure Logan's Run had several hundred people just in the prop shop special effects department, even more in construction. Production ramped up heavily in the 80s. A lot of shows, things like, I can't think of one of the medical shows, what was it called? MASH. MASH was big, and so there were places where you could really go in and learn in the early 80s. Then in the 90s, I started doing my own features. I spent some time at Aaron Spelling Productions doing television, running their department, running the shop, and then really started doing my own pictures in the mid-80s. And did some smaller stuff, and then I did a film with Peter Hyams called Sudden Death, which had almost every effect you can think of in it. Water, pyrotechnics, helicopters, green screen. In the late 70s, a lot of digital effects started coming in. The computer started coming in. I remember Brainstorm being one of the bigger after Star Wars. Star Wars showed a lot of people how it was done, but there was less computer stuff and more miniature, that type of thing. And then in the 90s, the digital effects started really coming into play. For physical effects, what we do, things haven't changed that much. Ever since the universe went bang, some of our stuff has been put into play. Gravity and that type of thing hasn't changed that much. But what has changed recently is the computer controlling machinery. So CNC machining, CNC plasma cutting, recently the 3D printing technology. And the computer itself, 3D, like SolidWorks, those types of drafting programs are incredible. Now we can test something to see if it's going to bind, or sort of the things that they were able to do in the aircraft industry forever and unaffordable for us are now, kids in school are learning SolidWorks. So it's come a long way. That's been the biggest change. Proportional hydraulic valves, being able to position things and repeat motion.
What are your favorite types of films to do effects on?
My favorite kinds of films are war films or car films. I did Talladega Nights. That was a lot of fun. We built a lot of cars, wrecked them. Fast and Furious 5, all the second unit, destroyed about 200 cars. So throw them 200 feet. Bourne Legacy was interesting. We built a lot of motorcycle rigs that you swear that Jeremy Renner was riding the bike and he wasn't. And so a lot of the stunt portions of it, the way they filmed it, he's actually on a rig that we built. And on that film, I got to build a rear steer truck in California that we shipped to the Philippines, and they put what they call a jeepney body on it. It's like these crazy Asian taxis, or buses. And so in one of the scenes, it's supposedly beating up against a wall, and the reality is it's a Chevy pickup with a steering component in the back end. So since I built that, I got to name it. So it's named after my daughter. It says Amanda Rose on it. So it was kind of funny, little tidbit.
When hiring a crew, what skills do you look for?
Physical effects, right? So you need a lot of hand skills. We look for a carpenter is a good skill. What we really like are guys like hot rodders, guys that can fabricate sheet metal, steel. Welding is a gigantic portion of what we do. But there's other skills, mold making. We touch every single skill there is, from plumbing to electrical to electronics to welding and sheet metal. We just apply it in a different way. So if somebody comes to me and has some basic skills, like sheet metal or welding, then they have an advantage. And those are the kinds of people we look for. Computer skills today, if you know SolidWorks or even AutoCAD. Our plasma machine that we use for, which has taken the quality of our work and the speed with which we can do it. And since the crews today are smaller, we have to find a way to be as efficient as possible. So standard things, we can just push a button and cut the same piece of steel plate or whatever. But with the SolidWorks skill, we can develop a device or a mechanism, and we can tell right away that how it's going to work, or we need to change this because it'll bind. So we can draw it, look at it in 3 dimensions, articulate it, and that's a skill that's really coming. Also for the 3D printing, we can quickly make a prototype, hand it to the director the next day or that day. Those kinds of things are, they impress people. You know, they can see it. They feel better about what they're actually getting.
You mainly work on large-scale productions. Is that a greater challenge?
The things about a larger film is the crew sizes are bigger. The issues of the aggravating issues are like money and budget and available help are not as a big a thing on a bigger budget film. Carrying crew members is not a big deal. If you have to carry 2 guys on a small project, it's expensive. But if you have to carry 2 guys on a really big project, it's like no big deal. So you can maintain your resources, and you're usually only dealing with 1 script, 1 director. You're planning things. They change, but they don't change as much. On a TV show, especially if you're chasing a script and you're about to start the next episode and you don't have it in your hands, you're not sure what to do. That's a tough thing. And so if you have all the information, it's a TV series is not that difficult. But when things change, and the other thing is smaller crew, you lose 1 guy. If you have 5 guys, well, you just lost 20% of your crew. If you have 20 guys and you lose 1 guy, well, it's only 5%. So those types of things are what make a series, and the pace of it is much, much quicker. And you have no chance to make up for anything. It's got to work the first time. It's got to be ready on the day. There's no tomorrow in television. So that's the challenge. I mean, that's actually the good thing. You're always on your toes, and that's probably the best place for a guy to learn how to do what I do. But bigger films, they're more fun, and the challenges are usually bigger. They're more complicated. I think sometimes on a smaller show, your brain starts to atrophy if you're not.
What have been some of your favorite effects you have done?
On Bourne Legacy, I did a really great, with help. It's never just me. I have a group of guys that work with me a lot. That their input's important, and so it's more like leading the team, But there was a explosion on a cabin in Kananaskis, Canada, that was really impressive to me because it looked real. It was supposed to be a Hellcat missile strike, and that's what it looked like. And there's no CG in it. There's a little missile trace but everything it was on the day, on screen, and the director just loved it. So making him happy. Mostly car stuff I really like. A lot of hydraulic stuff. That's a lot of fun. It's a mechanisms. Building stuff's more fun than day-to-day maintenance. But we do so many things, you know. People don't realize when they see somebody in a shower scene, there's steam and water running. Well, we plumbed it. We made the steam. If there's a fireplace burning, we plumbed the fireplace and made it look real. If there's doors that open and close, spaceship stuff, you know, the classic is the pneumatic doors on Star Trek, right? Well, it's just a door on a hanger, but there's a guy behind it pushing it. Elevators, things that bring the set to life. When you look out, when you see a scene and there's out the window is supposed to be real, but you're on a sound stage and there's greens outside the window and we're blowing the leaves back and forth, you believe you're there. If you stop that, suddenly the scene doesn't look right. And people can sense that, oh, they're on a sound stage. So those types of things are that's the bread and butter of what we do.
As a special effects coordinator, what types of permits do you need to have?
Depends on where you are. Every state is different. Sometimes every city, county is different. Park City, I meet with the fire department. We talk about the things we're going to do here at the studio. I pull permits for open flame. If we're doing anything that's a large flame, then I'll go back to them and tell them, okay, this is this. They pretty much leave us alone here in Park City. I've demonstrated some things for them and their confidence is high, and they look at my resume and my history, and that's been excellent here in Utah. But I have to have at home in California, I have to have a Class 1 pyrotechnic operator's license, special effects. I also need a Type 33 with the federal government, Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. That's a user's permit. And then there's also a Type 20 with them that's a manufacturer's license. If you take two components, put them together, and turn it into something it wasn't before, now you're a manufacturer. So you need to have that license. And that requires background checks, and every 3 years there's an interview. Any pyrotechnics that you purchase, you have to log in, log out. So that's a complicated process, but I've had my one powder card and a federal license since the 80s, 81. So you have to be responsible. It's no quick, to get to this level, there's no quick fix. There's no easy road in. You have to come work for me for 10, 15 years sometimes before I say you're competent. Yeah, it all depends. You could probably get competent in, say, 5 years if the projects are busy enough, if there's enough events happening. But if you're just doing a one thing here and a one thing there, it takes a long time.
When you're not working on a production, what do you like to do? I imagine it's something with cars.
Yeah, I have a vintage race car. It's a 67 Camaro road race car. It's like a Trans Am car from the day. It's 3,000 pounds, 600 horsepower. It's a lot of fun. I have a nicer street car. It's a 69 Mustang Mach 1. So I'm not a Ford or Chevy guy. I like them both. Anything that was probably made between 66 and 72, I like it. But I raced a lot of go-karts. Used to race dirt bikes, that kind of thing. I have a pilot's license, instrument rated. I had a plane for 6 or 7 years. Flew my kids all over different countries. We went to Canada, Mexico. So that's, if it's got a motor in it or if it's complicated, I usually like it. Big Formula One fan. Grew up racing slot cars and stuff like that, which is sort of like where I got the skill set that I have.
Sure. Yeah.
Those types of things.